Vance Boelter. Vance Boelter was born in 1967, and the course of his life would come to reflect a complex intersection of deep religious belief, global outreach, personal hardship, and, ultimately, a devastating act of violence. His early years were marked by a powerful spiritual transformation. At just 17, he claimed to have had a life-changing encounter with Jesus Christ. This event steered him onto a path of devout evangelical Christianity, and he would go on to spend decades preaching and traveling in service of his faith. Driven by a passion to spread the gospel, Boelter founded a non-profit organization known as Revoformation Ministries. Through this ministry, he reached out to audiences across the globe, particularly focusing on volatile and conflict-ridden regions such as the Middle East and Central Africa. One of his most frequent destinations was the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, where, between 2021 and 2023, he delivered numerous impassioned sermons. While he spoke empathetically about the suffering of the Congolese people and the damaging legacy of colonial and foreign interference, his messages also carried a strong undercurrent of social conservatism. He denounced the moral direction of the United States, particularly criticizing its changing attitudes toward gender and sexuality, which he framed as a spiritual decline. Although Boelter's public online persona was largely apolitical, those close to him were aware of his deeply conservative views. His longtime friend David Carlson confirmed that Boelter was staunchly opposed to abortion and had been a registered Republican since the early 2000s. He supported Donald Trump, though Carlson insisted that Boelter never displayed an unhealthy obsession with politics or political figures. His criticisms, Carlson explained, were rooted more in religious belief than in partisan fervor. Boelter's professional life was varied and at times unconventional. He worked for companies like Nestle and even managed a 7-Eleven store. Eventually, he shifted into the private security field and established his own firm, Praetorian Guard Security Services. The company promoted itself as offering armed patrols and showcased vehicles modeled after police cruisers, including Ford Explorers outfitted with flashing lights. On its website, Boelter emphasized his experience in international conflict zones, highlighting skills and tactical knowledge that might have given him the ability to convincingly impersonate a police officer. The business was registered at his home address, and a woman believed to be his wife was listed as its CEO. Although Boelter lived in the small town of Green Isle, Minnesota, about an hour outside of Minneapolis, he often spent time at a rental property in the city owned by Carlson. According to Carlson, Boelter was facing growing financial problems, partly due to the cost of his frequent missionary trips. Despite searching for new employment, including work in the funeral services industry, he seemed unable to stabilize his situation. The strain appeared to be mounting. In 2019, Boelter received a notable appointment to the Governor's Workforce Development Board, a volunteer advisory group tasked with supporting employment and economic policies in Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz praised Boelter for his character and sound judgment. Records indicate Boelter served on the board with State Senator John Hoffman, though there is little evidence that the two men had a personal relationship outside of the boardroom. On the night of June 13, 2025, Carlson spoke to Boelter for what would be the last time before the tragic events of the following morning. Boelter had seemed exhausted and retreated to his room early. By morning, Carlson discovered an alarming message from him. Although he didn't share the exact content of the message, Carlson said it suggested that Boelter was contemplating death. Fearing that his friend might be suicidal, Carlson immediately notified the police. But what followed was more horrifying than anyone could have expected. Early on the morning of June 14, 2025, law enforcement officers arrived at the home of Representative Melissa Hortman, the Democratic Speaker of the Minnesota House. They were drawn to the scene by reports of a suspicious vehicle that looked like a police cruiser, complete with emergency lights. The man inside, dressed in a police uniform, was identified as Vance Boelter. In a sudden burst of violence, he shot a man standing at the door. Police later determined that both Representative Hortman and her husband had been fatally shot. Nearby, Senator John Hoffman and his wife were also wounded in a separate attack but survived after undergoing surgery. Boelter engaged in a shootout with the officers before fleeing into the house and vanishing temporarily. Authorities later tracked him to Green Isle, where they arrested him. Inside his vehicle, investigators found a disturbing set of items. A hit list that included prominent Democrats such as Representative Ilhan Omar and Senator Tina Smith, as well as individuals linked to Planned Parenthood. Anti-Trump protest flyers were also discovered, suggesting a broader ideological motive for the violence. Governor Walz described the incident as a politically motivated assassination, though law enforcement emphasized that the investigation was ongoing and that Boelter's exact motives remained unclear. Drew Evans, director of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, noted that although Boelter and Hortman had attended the same board meetings, no personal connection had been established. The black Ford Explorer used in the attack was consistent with the police-style vehicles featured on Boelter's security company's website. Archived photographs of Boelter's residence also showed a similar vehicle parked outside, further confirming his access to such equipment. The news of the attack sent shockwaves through both political and religious communities. Pastor McNain Kashima, who had worked with Boelter during missionary trips, expressed disbelief, describing him as someone who would never hurt a fly. Yet, Carlson, while equally stunned, speculated that financial pressure and mental strain might have led Boelter to unravel. "Maybe things didn't work out," he said, "and he just gave up and decided to go out in a blaze of glory." Despite the violence he ultimately committed, Boelter's background did not suggest a history of aggression. His criminal record was minimal, consisting only of minor traffic violations. He presented himself as a reverend and author and claimed to hold academic credentials, including a doctorate in educational leadership from Cardinal Stritch University. On social media, he occasionally mentioned having children, though details about his family remain sparse. During his earlier missionary work, Boelter once declared that his life's mission was to tell people about Jesus. But by 2025, that mission had devolved into a harrowing episode of violence that left a deep scar on Minnesota's political community. His life, once driven by a calling to preach peace and salvation, ended in a way that raised troubling questions about radicalization, psychological health, and the unforeseen consequences of ideological extremism. And with that, thanks for watching. Please subscribe.